Okay? All right, I'm good to go. Everybody ready? Sure. Is everybody ready out there? Can you hear me? We are going to get going on this next session. Welcome to the subscription-based programming session, Here to Stay or Gone Tomorrow. Thanks very much for the organizers for inviting me to speak at this. I really appreciate it. I'm your moderator panelist, Greg O'Brien. I'm editor and publisher of CART with 2ts.ca. And on my far left is Natalie Klim. I said it right, correct?
Yep.
Executive Director and Research Associate at MIT, at the MIT Communications Futures Program. And then David Ash, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Show Me, which I think everyone's familiar with in Canada. Before we dive into the topic at hand, we're just going to introduce ourselves a little bit. I've been a journalist for over 25 years, the last 19 of which, believe it or not, I've been covering this industry specifically. CART stands for Cable, Radio, Television, and Telecom. So I have a lot more facts about this industry swimming along in my head than I ever thought possible. And we have a room that is very unlike the CRTC hearings. It actually has windows and you can see the sky, which I love. And now CART.ca this year, we've launched a soft launch so far of something called Find TV, F-I-N-D TV, which is a way for customer service reps when they field calls or emails or whatever from customers to be able to tie the show back to the channel for them. Something really fast, works really well for them, where if somebody calls in and they're not familiar with the packaging, they're not familiar with the channels, but they know which shows their family watches, they'll be able to tell the shows to the customer service rep who'll be able to tell them what package they need to purchase. Simple little tool, but we're hoping it helps the industry a little bit. So that's me, and I'm going to turn it over to Natalie next to give a brief introduction of herself.
So I work for a program at MIT called the Communications Futures Program. It's a joint program between the Media Lab, the Sloan School of Management, and the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab. We are an industry-sponsored program, so basically our unique characteristics are that we are looking at the evolution of communications from a very multidisciplinary perspective. So we're not just looking at technology or economics, we're actually looking at all of those different dimensions together. So it's a very multidisciplinary team of people on the MIT side, and then we're sponsored by actual companies in the private sector who we treat as our collaborators. So we have people, most of them are network engineers, there's certain executives as well, and so together we're trying to figure out where this is all going, with some intention to maybe try to influence or shape things to go one direction or the other, which is very difficult given all of the various competing and conflicting interests going on all the different pieces of the industry. My particular focus in this very large group has been on the future of television and video. So with it is really coming from the perspective of what I'm sure you've all heard about in terms of industry disruption, where the traditional pay TV providers are feeling like they're being disrupted by this online video industry. So that's where I'm coming from, and I've been looking at the online video space from about 2005. Before that, we were looking at other services that have traditionally been provided by the telecom operators, and as they one by one are being sort of disrupted by online services, whether it's voice or music, which wasn't a telecom product but another industry's product. And then we moved on to video, and we've kind of stayed there because unlike some of the other services that we looked at, it's an incredibly rich dynamic space, and things just keep changing all the time. And my role as an academic is to try to make sense of this constant stream of announcements and trends, and try to create some frameworks that make it a little bit easier to understand where all these, what the significance of all these little things that are happening are, and sort of to ground some of these things in some of the sort of theories coming out of the business school, looking at some of the experiments that are coming out of the Media Lab and looking at the regulatory aspect of it. So all these things, lots of activities going on in different directions, but again, my focus is on video. That's what I do. And I'm actually here as much to learn from everybody as you are to learn from me, because I am an academic, and so I really like to find out from the people who are actually out there on the front lines doing this thing. I need to hear from you.
Thank you. David, let's hear your intro.
So thanks for joining, everybody. I'm David Ash. I run Show Me, and I'm sure the organizers of the summit here knew this, but tomorrow will be my 14-month anniversary on the job at Show Me. So I thank them for doing this with very good timing for me. But I have been in the content business for quite a while. It's what I love to do. One of my very first jobs was at a movie theater, and I'll date myself a little bit, but this is pre-Cineplex, Mega House era. Little two-house movie theater in the town I grew up in, one of my first jobs. But from there, many of the things I've done professionally have been around content. I've worked for a phone company in the content space. I worked for a company called Redbox in the content space, and now I'm at Show Me. I'm not going to steal any of Greg's thunder, but I'm very bullish on the subscription video on demand market. And thanks for letting me be here.
I'm quite bullish as well on the market too. And in the spirit of what Natalie said earlier about learning from the rest of you, I don't want to wait until the end to wait for questions. So if you have a question, put your hand up. There's a mic over there. Feel free to just put your hand up and get my attention, and I'll turn to you. I'll turn to you right away. So don't be shy. So the session description says Netflix, Hulu, Show Me, Crave TV, Spotify, Apple Music, and a bunch of other on-demand subscription services are rising quickly. It's quite dizzying to keep track of, as we all know. There's announcements like constantly. So consumers clearly want to find content they want on their schedule, but is this, the SVOD, OTT, is this the ultimate destination for content distribution? So we're going to look at the pros and cons of all of that as the discussion continues. But before we get into that, I wanted to take a bit of a step back because I was reading a bit of some papers that Natalie had circulated to us, where she really discussed on sort of how people get hung up with the definition of TV, because it means so many different things. And you can't go very long in this industry without reading something that says, TV is dead, which is a really shallow, stupid, misleading statement. There are certain things about TV that's changing, but to say TV is dead is just ridiculous. So I just wanted to start off with a definition of, TV, how you see it changing, and Natalie, if you can take us a bit into your research on that and how people get so hung up on all that.
Sure, yeah. Well, the gentleman from Ryerson gave a really good talk yesterday. I don't know if you guys heard it, on the history of television. He kind of stole my thunder a little bit. He actually used one of the slides that I tend to use, which is breaking down the word television into tele and vision, which is really, if you break it down that way, you're basically talking about the delivery of any kind of visual media over telecommunications network. The model that we ended up with in the 1950s or late 40s and early 50s is one of any number of possible models that were in inventors' minds and in the labs before it reached that point. So if you go back to the really pre-industrial version of all these different combinations of just taking visual images and somehow throwing them over telecommunications networks, you come up with all kinds of services, and it actually looks a lot, what we see today looks a lot like what we saw way back when, whether they were actual experiments or even just imaginations based on what people thought would be possible someday. So we have this very, very multifaceted landscape right now of all kinds of things that you could consider television if you look at it in this broader sense of the word. And you mentioned the difficulties that I've had. I've had some really very tense discussions with network engineers and people who have been putting their heart and soul into making it technically possible to get HBO online so you could watch Game of Thrones without a pay TV subscription. And so when I stand up there and say, well, if you start talking to the YouTube universe and the Snapchat people and the Instagram people, some of the quotes I threw up on the screen was, who cares if you can get HBO online, when you want it, HBO on the moon? Who really cares? I mean, who cares about HBO? Who cares about like TV shows? Who cares about a 30-minute, 60-minute program? We're creating platforms so that you can stream, just live whatever you want. YouTube videos are like 5-second, 5-minute productions like we just saw in the session that was in here just before this one. People in their kitchens and their living rooms making things. That's all part of this landscape. So you're very narrowly focused on making the old thing just get kind of moved onto a different delivery network. And that's not what disruption is all about. That's one dimension of disruption. But if you dig down deep into a lot of the disruption theory, Clay Christensen, who I know has been trashed a lot lately, he's a big name in my world. There's still a lot of valuable things in his work, and one of the most interesting things to me has always been that when you change the technology, and this is where Christensen and Marshall McLuhan really should have sat down and had tea together one day. You don't just change, the product is going to change when you change the technology. So everything that we're seeing right now is still completely new, it's completely experimental. We don't know if any of this stuff is going to be around in 5 years. It's, whether it's because the business model isn't going to work or whether it's because there's no real aesthetic meaning to some of these things. They're just all very, let's try this out, let's try that out, and maybe something will emerge later on that will stay, or maybe it'll just constantly change. I mean, we're not really sure because the whole environment is different. Things change quickly, nothing's very stable for very long. But the idea that when you're thinking about television and online video, it's not just about taking your traditional content or your traditional programming and finding a way to get it technically on the internet, dealing with the regulatory issues, whether it's net neutrality or program access rules. It just goes way beyond that to completely blowing apart what it means to have visual images from point A to point B over some kind of telecom network.
So David, is Show Me going to be around in 5 years, do you think? What? Will there be linear TV in 5 more years? How do you think Show Me has affected how Canadians think of television?
So I think yes to a lot of your questions there. I'll try and address pieces of those. But linear TV, still a healthy business, and for a lot of the things, and we've discussed this before, it's not just live sports, but people will watch content in a lot of different ways. They'll watch them on linear broadcast shows. They'll watch them on a subscription basis. Sometimes they'll pay to watch individual shows as well. I think all this is adding to the options customers have, and people have spoken with their wallets. People subscribe to services like Show Me or Netflix. People still watch linear TV, and the advertising market is there and proves that. I think all of these platforms will be around, and I think there will be more. If we look out 5 years down the road, there are going to be platforms that we aren't even thinking about. And it doesn't matter whether it's over the top or is it over a cable fiber, is it a combination of both. I think you're going to see all that, but some of what you're seeing with how people watch TV and what they watch probably hasn't risen yet. People, I'll give an example, a company called Periscope. Most people have probably heard of it now. 2 or 3 years ago, had anybody heard of that? And now you're seeing them in the news quite a bit, but people are watching content there. And whereas before it might have been user-generated content, you're starting to see professionalism follow. Professionalism will follow wherever the eyeballs are. And that's why I think a lot of these platforms that we'll see in 5 years we may not have seen them yet, or they certainly haven't become mainstream yet.
Well, and you see some of these platforms, say take Periscope or Facebook Live, they're trying to, it looks like TV broadcasting to me. You take the Hulu skinny bundle that they've launched or are launching, and that looks like cable TV to me. It looks like we're kind of disrupting, the traditional companies and kind of reforming what we've already made or what already exists, but just delivering it over IP instead. Is that fair?
Well, I think, I mean, if you look at Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Hulu, and those, the big three and similar services, then I think, yeah, we are just recreating the same model. But if you look at Instagram and Twitter, I mean, Twitter's live deal with NFL, that's just going to be same old programming through a different platform. But what's happening is the more especially the traditional players move onto these platforms, they realize that they have to change their content to suit the unique properties of that platform. And they still don't really know what that means. So one example is the Young Turks. I don't know if anyone watches the Young Turks in this room. They created content for YouTube, but then they created a show specifically for Facebook. And their show for Facebook is different than what they created for YouTube, because they recognize that Facebook is different than YouTube, even though it's still short form and it's still not traditional programming, but there's these finer sort of categories, and that's one of the things I do, as I try to create taxonomies. You start with this big pile of stuff, and someone says, okay, sort that out. Tell me what does that mean? And so you start to look at it all and you go, okay, what's common? What are some dimensions here? You do your 2x2s and try to figure out what's the difference between this and that. And the big slice is, okay, you've got the Netflix and the HBO, and I call those the sort of more conventional entrants. But then you've got what is, for the most part, if not exclusively, social media. Social media platforms are these new distribution platforms. So they're not just complementary components to the experience, like Twitter being the back channel to live TV programming. Twitter as back channel versus Twitter as distribution platform, those are two very different things. But social networks, social media as new video distribution platforms is still new, and how that's going to change the nature of the programming is what I'm most interested in right now. And will users' tastes change? Like you mentioned, professionalism will follow. So professionalism is one dimension, is one aspect of it. But maybe it won't follow, I don't know. I mean, again, the people that were on the panel here before me were talking about, and some of the research I've done has talked about this desire for unprofessional content because it's unprofessional, because it has certain characteristics that you lose when the professionals come in. Last year, there was a YouTube conference where a lot of these original YouTube creators were really lamenting the fact that their industry was now being infiltrated by money. I mean, like, everyone wants money, and all of a sudden the money's coming in. It's like, I call it the gentrification of YouTube. All of a sudden, whatever made it what it was is now going to be lost because of money. So again, how are users' tastes going to change? And on the one hand, we do want these high production value. There's the whole series movement, which is now really becoming fantastic, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't like watching all the other YouTube stuff myself, but I'm from a different generation. And that's all very high production cost stuff. It's a very different cost revenue model than this other stuff that you're seeing on social media. But where it's going to go, again, we don't really know. Maybe it'll become more professional, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll have two sets of media products. Maybe there'll be two different markets. Maybe one will replace the other. It's hard to tell right now.
Yeah. David, can you envision a day where Shomi is incorporating Twitter or Instagram or whatever, YouTube or whatever, more into its system and sending out as content rather than just as a marketing tool, which is, I think, how you primarily use those channels now? Yeah,
so in Instagram, we're doing Instagram, but we use a lot of these platforms for promotion, to some degree for distribution, which is something we've gotten into. So I do envision a day where we'll use it more so. So I'll give an example. We had a show called The Enfield Haunting, which was a miniseries, 3-episode miniseries that we aired around Halloween of all things last year. And we actually premiered the first episode on Facebook. Great avenue for promotion. One of the things I found is when you talk about discoverability, There's a lot of good content out there, whether it be user-generated, whether it be professionally produced, or everything in between. And it's imperative that you stand out somehow. And if we could actually take the first episode of The Enfield Haunting and make it widely available, we felt that that would get people to watch it even more. So that's where we're blending in a little bit as opposed to just purely promoting. We're actually distributing that on our Facebook page. And we had over 1.5 million people watched it. So for us, that was a big success. And that's an example of how we're actually using it for something beyond just straight promotion, but actually having that be an avenue for our content. Will that happen widely? I think it'll take time for that, but I'm just speaking for my own experience here.
Are you able to follow the money though, where you premiere that on Facebook, and can you tie that back into how did this increase subscriptions for us?
So one thing to clarify, we're only about subscription. We don't do advertising. Facebook will do advertising, and I have nothing to do with that piece of it. But for us, the more people we can engage to our platform to try, as long as they come in for a free trial or they pay for subscriptions, we can generally follow that. One of the things, we don't use traditional measures of viewership. It's all about, do subscribers, do they come in, and do they engage with our service? Do they pay us, and do they engage with our service? And so we had success with that. Again, I'm not at liberty to really share numbers, but we were very happy with that kind of venue, and I think we would do more of that.
Okay. Natalie, you mentioned we've got questions. Let's do that first. Peter, I saw your hand first, so you can go first.
Thanks, Greg. Peter Miller, I'm a lawyer in Toronto. One of my favorite sayings in looking in the future is a William Gibson saying. He was the author of Neurodancer, and he said, the future's all around us, it's just unevenly distributed. Unevenly distributed. And what I think that says about this thing is that when we look at trends, first of all, we see that television content isn't fundamentally changing and is not likely to fundamentally change in the next 5 to 10 years. The feature film form has been around for 50 years, very successful format, dramatic form, 30 minutes, hour, make it slightly longer, binge view, etc. Yes, we're evolving it, but we're not fundamentally changing it. YouTube's having an impact on information programming because rather than watching a whole cooking show, you go out and find the vignette or whatever. So that's where it's really changing. But fundamentally, I don't think in the next 5 to 10 years at least, television, the form is going to change. What I find interesting about this question is I think the real question is the corollary, because I think subscription is definitely here to stay. The question is ad-supported television here to stay? To me, that's the real question, because again, when you look at that, you see a bunch of trends that say, maybe not. Certainly in Canada, I don't know if it's true in the US, but advertising as a percentage of GDP is going down. If you look at trend lines, it's going down. We know part of that is because of a move towards content that is branded and more marketing efforts that are more successful as people ad skip. Any consumer of Show Me or Crave or Netflix gets used to watching television without ads. It's really hard to go back. So is it fair to ask that question? What do you think is the future of advertising supported television?
Me or so?
Either I can go too.
Either way.
My own opinions, I mean, I've been covering this industry for quite a while. My own opinions with ad-supported TV, I mean, I kind of like linear TV. I like the rhythms of it, but the problem is when the commercial comes up, my phone comes out. That's my rhythm when I happen to be watching linear TV. So how many of the ads do I see? I don't know. It's hard to tell. But I've been repeating this story a little bit because I talked to an independent cable operator, and this is his idea, but I won't say his name because I don't want to get him into trouble. And he sort of found his business is better with broadband, and he sees that as his future. And all of the different channels that he offers as well to all of his customers, which he knows he needs to offer for the next little while, he finds to be a bit of a pain in the rear end. I'm looking at the chorus guys right in front of me, so they're probably wondering who this distributor is. And his idea was that maybe in the future we'd take this skinny basic idea that just launched and turn it sort of towards linear TV in general and start to think of linear TV as the way long distance has developed. Whereas it used to be something people would pay for by the minute, big money. And now it's just kind of a toss-in, unlimited long distance numbers, for $2-3 or even free. So maybe linear TV is something that you buy a broadband subscription from a carrier, and then for an extra $10, you get 50, 100 channels of linear TV that just run constantly with the ads as they always have. So because there's still value there for some people, but people buy the broadband subscription and then pay for the convenience of anytime, anywhere viewing. That's just sort of my opinion as informed by a carrier I recently talked to.
No, I agree with what Greg said. I'll add two other points to that, to your question, Peter. Free is a good model for a lot of folks. And I think as long as there is a free model, which advertising supports that, there'll be an audience for it, and people love to watch things for free. Well, I think Show Me is a great bargain at $8.99 a month, but I can't beat free. And I think as long as there's people that want to watch things for free, you'll have an advertising-based model. I think, to a lot of what Greg said, it will change a bit. But I certainly think it'll be around. The other thing is, a lot of the things you'll see on live are better watched live. So if I think about what are great things to watch on live TV, sports, the Oscars, the Olympics soon to be, and those are always going to have an audience that is supported by advertising, but also when there's a result, when there's an event with a conclusion, people will often want to see that live. And I think as long as you have live TV, there will still be destinations which will yield an ad-based model.
I don't know if this will be a very satisfying response, but what I tend to do when people ask questions is I start breaking down the assumptions in the question, and then I ask alternative questions, or I question the question. So I would question both, what do you mean by advertising and what do you mean by television? From the advertiser's perspective, they're looking to the internet for where are they going to spend their money. And online video, again, is a very complicated space. If you just look at the ad-supported models like Hulu or YouTube, you're going to get one picture. But then you bring in, Facebook, and the more, Facebook is this thing that hasn't been considered part of the television landscape, but it really is becoming part of the television landscape. And from the advertiser's perspective as well, they're looking at search and everything else in that whole big space of where they're going to shift their spend, their ad spend. So I know that's not a very, very good answer to your question. The other thing that I've been looking at, which I think you mentioned, is the trend towards branded content. And that's an old model that's coming back again, and it's coming back in new ways. And there's more and more money going towards branded entertainment. And some of it is actually pretty good. It's pretty interesting. There are certain things I've seen that I didn't realize was branded content. Some of it is obviously branded content, but I don't know if anyone's seen the movie or even just watched the trailer, which is what I do with films now. Mostly is I just watch the trailers and I'm done. Werner Herzog's new film on the internet, it's called Lo and Behold. I watched the trailers and it looked really amazing, and it was totally fit into the kind of questions that we deal with at my group at MIT about, it's more like the peril version of the internet. What are the implications of everything being connected, and there's all these security issues, and it looked really great, and he's a great filmmaker. And the more I researched the film for completely different reasons, eventually I found out it's actually a piece of branded content that is completely funded by a B2B security company, like internet security company, data security. It's called NetScout, I think. And they had hired an advertising agency to do all their branding and whatever, and they said, hey, let's just make a big movie, get Herzog to do it, because he's been doing all the movies for the cell phone companies on texting and driving, and so when you see that change, it's still a very it's a problematic area, the whole branded entertainment thing, but it has some potential to impact the advertising dollars somehow, from not completely disappearing, but it addresses ad blocking and all the anti-advertising issues that you raised.
Well, when you mentioned the Young Turks in our conference call, I went and watched some of their stuff, and I saw one of their sort of different business models as well, where they asked their viewers online to use a special URL when they shop on Amazon. So you type in the special URL into your browser and shop on Amazon, and if you use that as you're shopping, so if you buy a blender, a book, snow tires, whatever, through this URL, the Young Turks get a piece of that action. They didn't say how much. I don't know how much they make. And they said, but they also, interestingly to me as a journalist, said this is a way to help keep us independent. And I immediately think, well, not if you're going to report on Amazon or e-tailing or electronic retailing, but that's something else. But it just it speaks to the different business models that people are experimenting with right now.
Yeah.
Raj, you were next.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Raj. I'm based in Toronto. I had a question about, I suppose, the long-term viability of subscription-based programming services, those with a monthly subscription model. And in particular, I'm thinking of Netflix and Shomi and Crave. So these are services that essentially sub-license content created by others, either the traditional system or movie studios, and then offer them to subscribers for a monthly fee. But in a sense, that makes them vulnerable as well, in the sense that eventually the rights for that programming is going to come up for renegotiation. The value associated with those rights is going to change, and they may have to end up paying more, which in turn may result in higher fees that have to be passed along to their consumers or some other way. Now, Netflix, I think, recognized that potential dilemma going forward, but it was able to sort of offset that risk by virtue of the fact that it operates in 130 countries, its revenue base is considerably larger, and it started making its own original content years ago, and it has dramatic plans to continue to create a large amount of original content, which it can differentiate itself through its offering and of course, resell that content as well. But long term, and I guess it's a question specifically for you, David, with Shomi, and I imagine the challenge is the same for Crave. Given that Shomi and Crave only operate in Canada, and you don't necessarily have that wide revenue base that Netflix has to differentiate the basis of your programming offering, how do you differentiate yourself? And if your answer, if I may jump it forward, if your answer involves perhaps taking some of the Canadian content created through some of your related companies and putting it on Shomi, is that enough to keep your service relevant going forward in terms of keeping it viable?
So, a fair question. I like our content. I'm biased, but I think we have great content. I don't think about content, what Netflix is doing is one thing, what Crave is doing is something else. And we have our own content strategy, and a lot of it revolves around taking really highly produced and highly watched content and making that available on a subscription basis. And I actually like that model. We've shown that it works. We have a lot of viewership. We do some different things as well. So for instance, everyone's heard the term binge watching. Some of our series we will offer in a binge basis. Others will do day and date. So if you want to watch a show like Jane the Virgin, if you want to watch a show like Empire, you get that 24 hours after the linear broadcast. And so I think it's not just about the actual content, but how we actually program it, how we schedule it. Those matter. So a show like Empire, a show like Jane the Virgin will be in our top 10 series, top 15 series on a week-in, week-out basis. And a lot of that I attribute to the fact that you get a lot of promotion, and people want to watch things in a day-and-date way as well as binge watching. So to answer your question, I do believe that we'll be competitive in licensing. Yes, we compete against Netflix and Crave for some of that content, but we work with the same content suppliers that they all do, and we have good relationships with them. And a lot of the content, 70% of it, of the non-family content we have is exclusive to us. So you have to come to Shomi to watch it, and that will continue to lure viewers in addition to how we schedule it.
Any other questions? Or did you want to chime in on that?
No.
Okay. Drew? You want to wait for the mic? Actually, it's coming around. I know they're recording, or some of this is live stream, but.
It's a two-parter. First one is name the company you were referring to, the independent distributor.
It was over a beer, so that's not fair.
Just kidding. It has to do with, it's kind of an extension of what you were saying, how they were wanted to potentially get out of the content business. And that might work for them, but then you look at larger companies, whether that's Shaw or Rogers and Bell, and they make a lot of money in that space. And I don't think they would have that luxury to just say, this is too difficult, we're going to back out. So if anything, with whether it's with free range or everything else, they seem to be wanting to become a content curator, aggregator in that OTT space, similar to what Crave and Shomi are doing and Netflix. And I guess what I'm going to ask the panel here is, 5 years from now, what do you think the makeup will be in terms of, these traditional companies playing in that space versus the Shomi's, Craves in that space, and how it'll all fit together?
So are you talking about like the traditional pay TV
I'm talking about traditional long-form content and where it lives and who's going to be it's based on the assumption that people don't want to go to a million different places to access content, so that there's going to be a bunch of companies fighting over being the place to go where you can search and find content. And so how does that play out?
I think one of the places that I'm looking at is where, a company like Apple is going to try to step in and be the aggregation point where it was at one point traditionally with the pay TV model. It was the network operator that was the aggregator, but their bundle is starting to fall apart, and these individual networks or channels, wherever you want to call them, are going online and operating on their own, which causes a lot of problems for consumers who are now, they used to be able to just go to one place, not just for searching, but bundled pricing, everything else. So if it's separating at the point of the actual network, where are you going to see this re-aggregation? And I think it's going to come from somewhere, downstream. It's going to be someone like Apple who's going to be the new aggregator. And how all that's going to shake out, I'm not sure, because I think there's a lot of inefficiencies in the system right now in terms of how content is being aggregated, and it's all mixed up because some of these companies like Netflix, they actually function like traditional programmers. They function like an HBO on the one hand, but they also function like a multi-channel. You call them BDUs, I think, in Canada. In the States, they're MVPDs, multi-channel video distributor programming distributors.
There are acronyms.
Yeah. So they're doing both of that in one place. But again, over time, these inefficiencies are going to sort of things are going to reform somewhere, somehow, and it could very well be a whole new player in the value chain that has never performed that function before.
Well, and it's not a very good customer service experience, when you're looking for content online, and is it in Netflix, is it in Crave, is it in Show Me, and you're in and out, looking for, and you're paying $10, $8, $10, whatever it is, all, for each of these different services, where in the past it was all kind of in one place. And say what you will about the usability of the cable box, at least you could search for all of the content that's there in one place. It's kind of clunky and whatever, but you could search for it. And, the more I think about it, unless there is an aggregator like this, we could be looking in 10 years and saying, well, I'm paying $10 for Major League Baseball and NBA and Netflix and Show Me and Crave and this and this and this, and you're quickly past what you're paying for cable right now. So maybe in 10 years we're saying, wow, remember the good old days when we were only paying $70, $80 a month to one place and all of the content was there? I don't think,
Another interesting trend, I mean, in Canada, there aren't as many services as there are in the States right now, and so consumers will do whatever it takes to get to pay the lease. So a lot, when you have all these different SVODs, and I did this for a while, and then it just became too much of a pain to keep managing this. But you basically just subscribe to one service for a day or however long it takes you to binge view. Girls came on, you wait because they don't do their whole full release. So you wait till the season's over, they're all available. You do the free month trial of HBO, you watch everything you want in like 2 days, and then you go, oh, sorry, no, I didn't really want it. Or maybe you'll pay $15 for that month, and then you quit because there's no commitment. And so what's happening in some cases, I mean, this is probably at a very small scale, the SVOD services are being used by consumers like TVOD services, transactional services. So rather than paying for a full series of Girls or whatever through iTunes and paying however much that costs, which is a lot more than $15 or free for a 1-month trial, all that revenue is being lost because people are just subscribing here for a month, and then they're going to subscribe here for a month, and they just kind of circulate, and in the end, they'll pay a lot less for consuming that content. But that's not an efficient way for consumers to do things either, but it just shows you that things are not set up properly right now, but they will eventually, market forces, whatever, little bit of regulation will somehow make things rearrange themselves. They will get rearranged, but when, how, and where exactly is
this
not.
is the point where the journalist in me wants to know what your churn numbers are in terms of customers coming in and out.
Is that a
But
churn? I've heard of it,
pretty
so-
sure you're not going to tell us what those are.
I'll comment. So it's an interesting discussion, but to Drew's point there, I think One of the things, and free range is a great example where I think whether it be a Shaw or a Rogers, they're very competitive. And one of the things, if you think about, I have a cable TV subscription, and is it a trip? I have a triple play, yes. So I have my internet, my phone, my cable. But the best part about cable for me, and this is me personally, is it's a great way to organize all my content. And what I think you're seeing, especially with free range, is you're now taking that subscription and enabling people to take it on the road with them or take it wherever they want. And so that's why I absolutely think that Shaw and Rogers are going to be competitive in that space, and other BDUs for that matter. But I think that's one way they're going to compete with this. I think it is, in some cases, you might say, well, there's so many services here, but I think one of the things that I'm challenged with, and it's my responsibility every day, for $8.99, I need to provide a lot of value. So I may have thousands of programs, but I need to make sure there's things on there that people want to watch, and that if it's on my service, people know to watch it there. So whether it be an Empire, Jane the Virgin, I could go down the list, but it's imperative that I tell people that it's on my service. One of the other benefits I have is my service can be carried by other MVPD/BDUs, depending on the market you're in, you'll use one of those acronyms. But so I have Rogers, I'm in a Rogers market, and I have Channel 300, my Show Me is there, and I can access that just like another channel. So I can actually get my Show Me subscription on Rogers. I can also get it on Shaw if I'm there. And that, again, adds value for the customer, where they can find something very easily on the cable dial in a way that is very tried and true. And we get a lot of viewership of Show Me on the traditional set-top box. People often will say, oh, it's going away. It's actually not. A lot of people know it's a very intuitive experience. People know how to use a remote control, and they can find their content. They do.
I have a TiVo at home, and it would be perfect if Crave and Show Me were on that box as well, but it's not. So if any Cogeco people in the room, get on it. We have a question right here and then one over here.
Okay, thank you, Greg and David, and Natalie. All your comments in the last few minutes really lead up to mine. But by the way, just to what Greg just said, in Brazil, rather than skinny basic, they're experimenting with all-in-one. So you just buy one price, and it's like an internet sort of service. You get charged for your time or program. That seems like people want more than anything else. We're used to that. With the following, though, from the need for aggregation and the glut in content and discoverability, and I think I read in CART that in Hollywood they're saying discoverability is problem number one, and if they don't solve it, there is no 2, 3, or 4. So it seems clear that we're going to a global online media delivery system with some kind of reaggregation. So I wanted to ask David, and Netflix has been very clear that global rights are their priority going forward. So I wanted to get a clarification on your Facebook premiere, whether that was global, and also whether Show Me is interested in acquiring global rights or going global, and yet, if whatever the answer is, why?
So one thing, we're only in Canada. I actually consider it, some people would say, well, Netflix is in X number, hundreds of countries. But I actually consider it an advantage. I'm programming, we have a Canadian service. I'm programming it only for the 37 million Canadians that can access it. So we're geo-blocked, so we're meant for Canada only. And when I go acquire content, I'm only interested in the Canadian rights. So others may do, and I can't speak to the programming strategies, though they've written about it quite a bit in Netflix, and then some others as well. There are other players that are global in nature. I'm very focused on the Canadian market. And when we deal with the content providers, they're very happy about that. We're very clear about our intentions. We're not interested in global rights, but we pay money just like every other licensor will pay money for those Canadian rights. And so far, that's worked pretty well.
And what about windowing, though? Like if you buy the rights for Canada for Empire, do you have to buy the linear TV rights? And do you have to buy all of the windows in order to get it exclusive for Show Me in Canada?
So I focus on the SVOD, on the specific SVOD rights. It's funny, everyone in this room probably knows what a window means, but to a regular customer, they just want to watch a show. But so something like Empire, and that's probably a good example, because in a prior season, we actually had the binge rights and we had the catch-up. So we might have had season 1 on, but now we're actually the first window. So within 24 hours of the premiere on linear, you can watch Empire now. But I focus very specifically on those SVOD rights. So when I work with the content, whoever licenses me that content, then that's what we're negotiating for.
Okay. We have another question right here, and then we'll come to you after.
You're talking about the evolution of an aggregator, and you see that somehow the convenience factor that used to be, that people used to relate to as cable, and you're saying, well, over the next 10 years, we'll see something evolve to be an aggregator. Isn't the aggregator today of convenience, at least for the millennials, things like BitTorrent? They're not, BitTorrent. They will get whatever they want in the most convenient way. So if they can get it on Netflix or if they can get it on cable, great. But if they can't, they're going to get it, and they're going to get it now because this is when they want to watch it. And isn't that the danger if we don't evolve to a new aggregator, that those types of services, and whether it's BitTorrent or the next generation thereof, will continue to be there because people aren't concerned about rights or payments. They're concerned about convenience of being able to watch it when they want to watch it.
Well, most of the studies basically say that piracy is driven primarily by just a lack of access, as opposed to someone really just wanting it for free. I don't know how true that is. I don't pirate stuff anymore. I used to, and it was primarily well, first it was the thrill of it. When it first came out, it was an experiment. It was interesting, but it really is because of what's not available. And actually, for a while we were working with ESPN, and they were doing a lot of research on how piracy was affecting their business, and they realized the unexpected consequence of their research was that it informed their programming strategy rather than being a security issue. They realized, well, this is giving us way more information about what we should be putting where, as opposed to what we need to be doing to prevent piracy.
David, do you want to talk about how piracy affects Show Me, or maybe
Use the
encourage
P
the
word.
launch
Well,
of Show Me?
So when you're talking about the P word again, you mentioned BitTorrent. So I mentioned I can't beat free, but I won't comment on things that are legal or not. But I mean, it's reality, and it's not just in the video business. It's in a lot of business. We talk about the music business. You can talk about any other type of business where people can pirate or do things for free. To me, the best way to combat that is to offer value for your money. So if you think about it, when iTunes came out at first, they offered songs for 99 cents. It was very affordable, and you had a big selection. Similarly, when I think about an all-you-can-eat model for content, like Show Me, for instance, we offer 18,000 programs, and not just myself, but not just Show Me, but Netflix, Crave, offer a good product for money. And it's very highly produced content, it's watched content, it's content people know and love, and it's for a small price every month. So that's, in my mind, the best way to combat piracy, by offering customers something that is of value. There are other methods of doing that, but again, I won't speak to that. I'm just talking about how do we address the market issue that you're talking about.
Okay, we have another question right there.
Hi, just want to say I really do like Show Me, because I do like Jane the Virgin and Empire quite a bit, big fan. But I wanted to link it to Canadian content and discoverability of that. So, you mentioned that you're primarily focused on the Canadian market. And so any specific strategies you're using with Show Me to promote, our Canadian shows? And if so, how is that linking back to, the regular cable subscriber? Like, is it anything you show on Show Me, is it boosting the ratings for, our regular linear television watching for, any of your Canadian shows?
So, thank you for the endorsement as well. I appreciate it. I'll have to get your name afterwards. But no. There we go, right? One of the things we're pretty proud of is 30% of our content is Canadian, is CanCon. And that doesn't just mean it has Canadian talent. It could be produced in Canada, but in any way you frame it, we have a lot of Canadian content. The one thing I would say is it's hard for me to comment on, you asked how does this impact ratings or cable ratings. I can't comment on that because that would depend on the broadcaster or wherever it is. But for us, we just focus on good content, but we're a Canadian service. We're programmed by Canadians for Canadians. So we do take pride in having 30% of our content be Canadian. And to me, it's great content. I don't think about, we need to go do this because it's Canadian content. It's just great content. And that's how we think about it.
And we don't really know, so I'll come to you in a second, we don't really know what, the big dog in the room, Netflix, has in terms of Canadian content. I mean, unless we did an audit and kind of went through all the individual titles. The two ones that I know of really are Trailer Park Boys and Between, I guess. If there's any others, shout them out. I don't really know. Degrassi, correct. And I once did a search and I saw something called Helicopter Canada, where it was something made in the Expo 67, and it really is just an hour of helicopter shots all around the country from 1967. You can search it on there. It's actually kind of an interesting watch, just to go back in time a little. Anyhow, but we don't know how much Netflix really is contributing to the industry by what they buy out of Canada, because they won't tell us. The commission tried to make them tell us, but that didn't go very well. If anyone watched the Talk TV proceedings, but the Canadian content and the promotion of Canadian content is obviously a challenge.
And it's funny because you mentioned the show Between, but actually that premiered on Show Me before it was on Netflix. Netflix took a later window to that, so I could probably say that we were the earlier window on that, and that was a great partnership between us and Rogers as well.
There you go. Hard to follow the.
So yeah, you help me out.
I was just curious of your opinion on, for me, spending most of my time in a digital space, I see things becoming more niche and more global. And so it's very interesting for you to say, we want to dominate Canadian content and do that. And so I'm just curious as to where you think these things will trend. Will it be, I can't manage my 40 subscriptions anymore, and would Show Me be looking more to acquire these niche markets in the long term? I was just curious of your input on it.
So when you say niche markets, you're not talking about geographic markets, you're talking about content markets.
Yeah,
So-
for instance, Gaia. Gaia is all things yoga now. It used to be My Yoga Online, and now it's holistic documentaries and that sort of thing, but it's really targeted a niche market in content.
So again, I can only speak to Show Me, but you raise an interesting point. One of the things we focus on, we're a general entertainment service. So the easy answer to your question is, well, we have genres like comedy or drama. We have indie. And so we do that. And so my goal in having a lot of assets is to have something that everyone will want to watch. The key with discoverability is making sure they know it's there and directing them if they came to Show Me to watch something, making sure they find whatever that is they want to watch. You're asking a broader question, which is how it will evolve and how the market will evolve. I can look to our neighbors in the South and say you're seeing there a proliferation of these smaller services that are lower in price and tend to focus more on specific genres. We've seen a little of that in Canada. It hasn't been as widespread. It's a smaller market. For Show Me specifically, we look at having a very general entertainment service, but I'm also realistic that there are certain things that are going to be better served elsewhere. And it's the easy example, but I'll use it, sports. So Show Me is not about sports. There are other venues, and they could be live. There are some OTT apps now that do sports as well, but that's not our sweet spot. So will you see other types of products or packages that suit that specific genre? And that's an easy example to use. I think you probably will. Will it be more limited than the US? Hard to say, but I think that will evolve. For us, my goal is to be able to expand our genre, but within our sweet spot.
Do you see social media at all, or using social media to develop, what you said, different genres, where you'd have a Show Me Facebook page for this genre, or a Snapchat channel for a bunch of different genres, and you have a different channel serving all of that, to try and congregate all these different viewing, groups into one place and funnel them towards the content you have on Show Me, if they're a horror fan or a drama or whatever you have on there.
Yeah. So I mentioned a lot of that is going to be, for us at least, very show specific. So I'll give another example. So we talked about the Enfield Haunting, which was targeted around Halloween, and a lot of it, you often use seasonal milestones or landmarks or certain things on the content calendar to drive this, but we premiered a show called Mr. Robot, which was an award-winning series, and there, some of the channels we used, and just the way we went about promoting that show, I'm not sure if people are Mr. Robot fans, but that would be very different than the way we'd market a show like the Enfield Haunting. So the social channels we would use would be a little bit different. The actual tone of our advertising or our promotion would be different, and I think we channel it that way. So it's much more show or genre specific as opposed to doing something in a global way. But for us, that's the way we would go about making sure that the right customers, the right viewers, the right subscribers see the shows that they're going to want to watch.
Natalie, I think you've done some work on social media as well in terms of how people are kind of self-curating all of these genre lists and finding content amongst themselves. What are the odds of that being the global search for everything?
I haven't actually done the research myself, but I was working with a graduate student who has disappeared on me. He graduated and he left, and I kept asking, I need to read your thesis, because his thesis was specifically on social media, basically functioning in that way in the value chain. So if you think about all these different value chain functions in the overall industry, this idea of, you know, the recommendations and, I mean, discovery, search and discovery was sort of the catch-all phrase for that piece of it. Who's going to provide that function, and where in the value chain is it going to fit? And his thesis was on social media providing that function, which again is different than social media being a video distribution platform. But I can't tell you any more than that, other than he had done a lot of research on it, enough to suggest that it was an important trend. But I have tried, and I tried even to get him again before I came to this conference, so I would have something meaty to say about it, but unfortunately I don't.
That's okay. Was there another question out there? I saw the microphone go that way. No? Okay. Now, let's turn our discussion towards the producers for a little bit. And I've got a bit of a convoluted question, so I hope you kind of stay with me. A number of years ago, the grocery industry changed how they offer products to the consumers. So they brought in a lot of ready-made food, and they took out a lot of packaged products, where they once had, you know, 15 brands of peanut butter, and now they had 5. So not good for the producers, except for those 5 brands of peanut butter. But what they saw is, while they cut their costs down in terms of how much peanut butter they had to buy, their volume of sales actually went up, because there were fewer choices. That they found there were fewer choices, and there have been, you know, academic studies done about this as well. There are fewer choices in front of people's eyes, and that helped them make a choice and buy peanut butter. So that's not really great for the producers of the peanut butter who were kicked off the shelves. But do you see, you know, with all of this, you know, this massive choice, and there's more opportunities for viewers and potentially more opportunities for producers, is it overwhelming? Will it be overwhelming? Will there, you know, there's lots of choice now. What's it going to look like down the road?
I can go.
I'll start. I'll give a more abstract, crazy answer, and then you can give a more realistic answer. But this is an interesting discussion that I had with some of the students at the Media Lab, who were coming up with new interfaces, particularly around search and discovery. And they created some very interesting hardware and software that involved some kind of a dome-like thing with different ways to interact with it with your hands, and it was all, and then it incorporated all of this software that would you know, take account of all the different people in the room, the family or group of friends that were trying to decide what they were going to watch. And by the end of it all, I said, well, your TV experience is now the process of deciding what to watch. It's not actually watching anything. You've created such an incredibly rich and fun experience in just choosing that you're in the, and I rarely end up watching anything anymore myself, because I'll spend an hour like going, you know, Netflix, oh, I'll try Hulu, no, I'll try Amazon, oh, let's see what's on HBO. And then, oh, well, there's one here and I'm paying for it. Maybe I can get it. Maybe it's on Netflix, you know. And after an hour and a half of that and watching the trailers and everything else, it's like, oh, I'm tired. I go to bed and I don't watch anything. But I've had this incredible experience. And there were a couple of examples from, you know, from popular culture that I drew from to try to express this to these students. There's this great scene in Hannah and Her Sisters where Max von Sydow's character is this crotchety old guy. He's been home watching TV all night while his girlfriend's out having an affair, and she comes back and he sits there and he's describing his whole channel surfing experience. And that was his experience. And it was, he didn't watch anything. He watched everything, and just little bits and pieces of it. So, you know, a lot of people are talking about this idea that discoverability, I mean, not using that term, but the process of discovering content is the experience. And can you build a business model around that? And actually, Netflix had I think it was The Onion, which is a news satire site, made up a mock story about Netflix's new, what was it called? It was $5 a month browsing program, where you just paid $5 a month, but all you did was browse. And it spoke to something very real, because I think most people, myself included, that became the experience. It was just trying to figure out what to watch. And then these Media Lab students actually made it into a game. And that wasn't their intention, but that was my observation of it. And it was backed up by lots of anecdotes that were starting to appear in the press about the state of affairs, which is that you're spending all your time getting recommendations, watching the previews, trying to decide, and ending up not really watching a piece of content in the end.
I'll try. Okay, so let me take that. I'm going to try and go.
Could be a
Okay.
premium show we add on for an extra $1 a month. We'll browse for you.
Searching, no. I think one of the things, if I kind of look at it in terms of three audience groups, your viewers, distributors like Show Me, and then the producers, or the peanut butter producers that you mentioned. I'll kind of finish with that. But to your point, Natalie, the fact that you can now search, and that's an experience, or there's fun in that, just alludes to the fact there's a lot more choice. And to me, that's good for customers or subscribers or viewers, because if you provide people with a lot more things to watch and a lot more choices, inevitably, I think that's a good thing. And some people may like the experience of that. Some people may like being referred to something. Some people may like the notion of discovery and then diving in and watching. But I think all in all, the more choices you can offer consumer, the better. For distributors, having more content, clearly a good thing for me. So with Show Me, the more we can offer somebody for their $8.99, the better. And that applies across the board to my competitors as well as Show Me. But the more choices we can offer of all different ilks, all different genres, a very good thing. When you talk about the producers, so I think implicit in your question is this good or bad for them? So if I were to put myself in the shoes of a producer of any kind of content, put aside if it's high-end content, if it's user-generated content, I'd think of a few things, and this is just me speaking, but I'd want to say, first of all, can I sell my content? Can I monetize it? Can I make money off of that? If somebody buys that, will they let me make the kind of program I want to make? And then will it get a big audience? Will people watch it? Will it serve a big audience for people to watch? So if I'm a producer, I think the SVOD model works in a big way for those folks. So you have more avenues in which to watch things. So we provide a big audience. Netflix will provide a big audience. The more audience that is curated or generated for all this content is a good thing for producers. Will people buy their content? There are more buyers in the market. That's clearly going to be a good thing for producers. And then the other question is, well, if you're a producer of content, you want to be able to produce the content you want. Now, if you're doing something in a user-generated fashion, even those standards have gotten better. So before, it may used to be a little camera on your computer. Now, for a pretty inexpensive way, you can produce high-quality content. And the more distributors you have, the more if they let you create the kind of content you want, to me, that's a very good thing for producers. So I would vote check on all three of those.
And now how do producers, though, how do they make sure that their content bubbles up to the front page of Show Me or gets promoted? How do you work with them to make sure that, they've made a show in Canada, you're working with them, you're obviously distributing with it. How do you make sure it bubbles up so that people surf over to Show Me that there it is, there's our new stuff? How do you work with them, and what do you tell producers?
So when it comes to producers, whether it be a movie or a series, we have a lot of typical promotional mechanisms on our site. So whether it be something's featured in our carousel, is it in a collection like our Super Series sampler, or 10 movies you probably didn't see but should. Those are certainly ways that we can bubble content up for subscribers. Some of the things I mentioned in terms of promotion on Facebook, a lot of what we do is focus on the content on our service. So I'm very proud of the brand we have. We did a great job of building our brand and having a certain look and feel, but it's all about our content. And a lot of what you'll see, whether it be Mr. Robot, now we're featuring Mad Dogs, a show called Playing House, or Odd Mom Out that just premiered, much of what we feature is the content on our service. I'm also realistic in that people are going to watch, they're going to come to my service if they have content they want to watch. So a lot of what we do, not just on our site, but in the marketplace, is all about featuring or promoting or merchandising content.
Okay. How much time do we have left? 10? Great. Any other questions out there right now? The one right here. The mic's going to come to you.
Just have a question, David, about the exclusivity of content. Is it likely to be over the next years that a particular series is only going to be available on one service versus on multiple services?
So, in the spirit of what Natalie said, I would ask questions to that, but I'll speak from the Show Me angle. In Canada, in Canada, the shows that we have exclusively, you have to come to Show Me to watch. So a series like Mad Dogs, you can, if you're going to watch it in this particular country, in that particular time frame, meaning we have things called windows for subscription, but Mad Dogs, you have to see it on Show Me. So I think to some degree it's already there. Will that evolve where certain shows are exclusive across the board? I think you're seeing it happen to some degree with some of our competitors already. I think it will evolve. I would say it's already there to some degree. Will that become more pronounced? That's a TBD. I think you're already seeing it. So how much more pronounced it could be, I think that depends on how many players there are in the market. And then as you see different players along that, call it that value chain with different windows, I think if they are going to distribute in other windows, if some distributors are going to distribute in other windows, then that's up to them to decide. But I'm very focused. For me, it's a little easier because I'm focused on one specific country and one specific window. But it's important that when people see that content, whether it be a Mad Dogs or Mr. Robot or Jane the Virgin, that they have to come to my service to see it.
Doesn't it depend a little bit on the title as well? Because Empire, you have exclusive for Canada, but it does leak over the border on Fox, off air and on cable, right?
So sure, there's a broadcast component to that, but again, that's where I talked about, okay, so some people are going to want to watch it live, and that's great. To me, a lot of people are going to want to catch up on that, and to me, it's actually a symbiotic relationship rather than a cannibalistic one. One of the things we found with Empire, it's done very well for us, but I'm happy that there was a broadcast component, not just because people could see it how they wanted to see it, but it actually helps on the marketing and promotion. So the more places that show is promoted, then that's going to, you've heard the expression, rising tide lifts all boats. I actually believe in that, and that's why I think a lot of these services, like a Show Me, are actually complementing traditional broadcast and linear broadcast, not competing with it.
This pertains, again, mostly to the U.S. because that's where my research is, but you know, the windowing system is, as you know, is getting very complex, very complicated, and you're getting more and more windows. And so the whole, if you think of especially the online distribution environment as an extension or complement to traditional, it's a syndication window or a series of syndication windows. And but they're getting, you know, everyone says windows are shrinking, but they're sort of shrinking, but at the same time there's more of them, and content's kind of floating around, and so the syndication market has its own set of dynamics. So online is sort of taking, you know, the traditional smaller cable networks that used to be the syndication windows for the larger networks are losing that business to online video, but then at the same time there's more smaller cable networks kind of coming in and then competing with online. So there's all these sub dynamics. The more you carve up that space, and basically anytime you can redistribute your content, it's a new exclusive window because it's exclusive for that window. And then you just get more and more windows. So it's really quite messy for someone in Europe. For me, as an academic, I can just drop pictures and go, ooh, this is really fun. But if you're someone like yourself and you have to figure this system out and actually make decisions on that, I think it's really confusing, but very, very fascinating.
We have another question right there.
Hi, I'm Jonas from TELUS. I'm really interested in the difference between music subscription services and TV or movie or audiovisual subscription services, whatever you want to call them. And anecdotally, I'm getting the sense that a lot of people in the sort of more TV movie space accept the price point of $7.99, $8.99, $9.99 is sort of an acceptable price point. On the music side, however, I feel like a lot of people say, oh, $9.99 for Spotify, kind of expensive. Again, this is totally anecdotal. Can you guys share any insight on that?
I'll take.
Maybe that's why Spotify is going to move into video. As I've read that too.
So you refer to music services. I think one of the things I would say is The all-you-can-eat or buffet-style model, it doesn't just, you're alluding to this, but it doesn't just apply to video. It applies to music. It applies to magazines. A service called Texture, which is great if you want to read all kinds of periodicals. And I think the horse has not just left the barn. It's already in the race and running around the track already. People have a way where for a small amount of money, whether it be every month or on an annual basis, they can get a lot of content. The one difference I would suggest between music and video is with music, a Spotify, if you have a Beats Music, or a Pandora, a slightly different model, but with those services, you often have a lot of the same content on all those services. So I don't know that you need many of those, whereas with video, it's very different. So I mentioned 70% of the content on our service is exclusive, so you have to have Show Me. In the same way, if something is on another service, you'd have to have that service. I say that's one big difference on that front. But I think the notion of getting real value, I think it's created this model where people can, what do you call it, binging? You can binge your music, you can binge your magazines or periodicals, but I think the biggest piece for me there is it's created a new way of consuming any kind of content. And that's why I think, Spotify has done really well. They also have an ad-supported model where you don't have to pay subscription. So this gets back to my notion of, it's hard to beat free, but they've done both.
Well, and audio sort of occupies a different brain space, really. I mean, you can drive, you can work while listening to music, and it's been free over the air on radio forever. So it's a bit of a different thing to think about, video versus audio. Where I just feel, and I've read some research, on this to back it up, that audio just has less value in the minds of most consumers, and they're less willing to pay for it.
And traditional television linear TV has become more like radio for a lot of people. It's this background thing. It's not like you're binging on some series that's really immersive. It's that you just turn it on, and it's in the background, like music, like radio.
Yeah, exactly. I've watched numerous hockey and basketball games with my laptop in front of me working, and kind of pop up. The announcers are great. You pop up whenever their voice gets louder, and you can see the plays, and then go back to work. Anyways, that's how I work. Drew, do you have another question? Grab the mic right behind you.
It's an interesting conversation comparing subscription television to radio and music, because in some ways the content itself ranges from a little bit more disposable. I mean, you can have 10 records and probably listen to those for months, and you're satisfied. Where I would argue you can give someone 10 series. I mean, TV is not disposable, but you don't typically, my kids excluded, watch the same episode again and again and again. So I guess the question I'm asking is, how does that play into a subscription-based service where you constantly have to find the new and the hot, and with the price point in mind, how is that going to evolve over the next little bit? Because you can't raise the price, but you got to try to find those hits.
Yeah. So it's a fair question. One of the things that we focus on, not just about licensing content, but what we program, is critically important. So it's imperative that we have a great content team, and I'm proud to say we have a small but very passionate and very experienced content team that is out there looking not just for what's popular right now. Is it an Empire, Jane the Virgin, or whatever it may be, but also trying to look out into the future at what may be popular. The other answer to your question, we have alluded to it a little bit, is how do we show people what those new things are? How do we help them discover something on our service? So whether it be a Mr. Robot or a series called Mad Dogs or something called Playing House, everyone knows what the Empires of the world are, or the Modern Families of the world, and sure, those get a lot of viewership, but a lot of people are actually looking to us to say, well, what should we watch next? What are those things that I don't know? So we'll have categories like You May Like or You May Love, and we also bring a human element to this. One of the things that we found a lot of success with is when we think about what we program, it comes from our staff or from the people that watch. We watch every single piece of content that's on our service. And we'll have a collection, for instance, that will say it's a super series sampler, or From My Family to Yours, which is literally programmed by our head of content and her two kids. And one of the things that was interesting to me, I was surprised, I didn't know how it would do, but people love the fact that they can actually go to our service and say, hey, a real family liked this show, and I will probably like that as well. They may or may not like it, but it would certainly attract them to that because they're seeing it marketed a little bit differently, promoted differently. There's a more human element to it. And that's one of the things, when we talk about differentiation, that's certainly one of the things we focus on, is we try to bring a somewhat more human element to our curation of content.
So it can't all be algorithms.
Pardon me?
It can't all be algorithms.
The algorithms are fine too, but yeah, we bring a more human piece to it.
Okay, well, I've been told we are out of time. Thank you for all the questions. That was excellent. And thank you to the panelists, Natalie and David.